Night after night, officers Sean Lansing and Gabriel Kent swaggered through their precinct as though every street and sidewalk were theirs to command. Traffic stops became power plays. Minor complaints vanished into thin air. Any challenge, too. Their authority was swatted away like a buzzing fly. To them, that badge was a shield, a throne, and a weapon all at once, until they singled out the wrong person. Regina Alexander was just another black woman they believed they could mock, intimidate, and dismiss, unaware that she was none other than Judge Alexander, newly appointed to preside over the biggest case of their careers. The arrogance that once kept Lansing and Kent untouchable would become their downfall. Their world was about to crumble, and everyone watching would see it happen in real time. Before we go any further, let me know where you're reading this from. Drop a comment below. And if you love stories that peel back the layers of corruption and fight for justice, be sure to subscribe right now so you never miss a moment. Regina. Alexander stepped out of her car and paused on the courthouse steps, lifting her gaze to the imposing columns that framed the entrance. The marble shone under a crisp morning sun, broadcasting gravitas and tradition. Usually, she found solace. Here, this was where she fought for justice, drew lines in the sand, and ensured they were enforced. But today, even that sturdy sense of purpose felt shaken. She'd just come from a harrowing encounter the night before, an encounter that ended with her pinned against her own car by two officers who assumed she was a nobody, a potential suspect for daring to stand up for her rights. She wore a bruise on her forearm like a fresh badge of betrayal. Regina could have told them a dozen times over who she was, but the moment she sensed their mocking tone, the way their eyes slid over her, with casual contempt, she knew they wouldn't believe her anyway. As she climbed the steps, she recalled the conversation in her mind like it was still unfolding. "License and registration," Officer Lansing had barked, voice saturated with condescension. "That's quite a tone," she'd responded, keeping her voice calm. "May I ask why you pulled me over?" "Suspicious driving," Kent chimed in with a lazy shrug. "You made a quick turn on Grove Street, then slowed down. Could be you're casing the neighborhood. Could be something else." "Really? Casing the neighborhood?" she'd repeated, stunned by the absurdity. Lansing's grin was a half-smirk. That said everything. To him, she was just another potential troublemaker. They forced her out of the car, joked about her dress and her fancy shoes, shoved her with a sneer, until Regina quietly said, "I'll be presiding over a major case tomorrow. If you have any questions, feel free to show up." They laughed, a coarse, ugly sound. "Yeah, and I'm the mayor," Lansing had quipped. "You got jokes, lady." She never told them her name. She just showed them her ID, watched the flicker in their eyes, and recognized instantly that neither of them truly comprehended who she was. A superior court judge who had just been transferred to handle a high-profile corruption trial. Now she stood at the threshold of the courthouse, scanning the crowd of morning arrivals. Defense attorneys juggling briefcases, a few wide-eyed interns, families unsure of where to go. Regina inhaled, squared her shoulders, and made her way inside. The marble floors clicked under her heels, a reminder of her authority in these halls. Outside courtroom A, she spotted an older colleague. Justice Garrett was known for his stern demeanor and unwavering dedication to the law. He caught her eye, and his thin mouth curved into something akin to a smile. "Judge Alexander," he greeted, voice raspy from a lifetime of rhetorical battles. "Your first official day in this building? Ready for the circus?" She nodded with more confidence than she felt. "Let's see if the clowns show up on time." His gaze flickered to the bruise on her arm. "You all right?" She'd nearly forgotten how visible it was. "Long story," she said simply. "2. Officers decided I didn't belong in my own car last night." Justice Garrett's brows drew together. "What were their names?" Before she could answer, the double doors swung wide. The bailiff stepped out and signaled it was time. "Court is in session, Your Honor." Regina wanted to tell Garrett everything, how Lansing and Kent had shoved her, humiliated her, and then let her go with a mocking sneer, but she merely placed a hand on his shoulder and nodded. "I'll fill you in later." Inside, the courthouse smelled of polished wood and old books, an aroma that grounded her. She walked up the aisle, black robes flowing behind her, the eyes of spectators following her every move. The attorneys in the gallery rustled their papers. Everyone rose, as custom demanded, and she took her seat on the elevated bench. That was when she noticed them. Officers Lansing and Kent, standing by the prosecution's table, chatting with a senior detective about the upcoming hearing. They were so confident, so sure. Regina recognized Lansing's grin even from a distance. It was the same arrogant curl he'd worn when he pushed her up against her car. Neither officer recognized her in her judge's robes. Why would they? They'd never truly seen her as a person, let alone as someone in power. A hush fell over the room. Everyone was waiting for her to start. She cleared her throat, tapped the gavel lightly, and said in a measured tone that reverberated through the silent hall, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Judge Regina Alexander, presiding." Lansing froze. She watched the realization flood his features, saw the color drain from Kent's face. For a moment, both men looked as though the floor might give way beneath them. Regina's stomach churned with conflicting emotions, anger, satisfaction, a slow burning sense of dread for what she now knew would come. They'd made a grievous error, mocking a black woman they assumed was powerless. Now they would find out she was anything but. "Let's begin," she said quietly, her voice the only sound in a courtroom that felt suddenly stifling. Regina set aside her personal feelings as best she could. Judicial impartiality was a cornerstone of her oath, yet the memory of being shoved against her own vehicle by Lansing and Kent loomed in her mind. It took every ounce of composure not to let anger color her questions or her rulings. The case that morning involved a routine hearing on a burglary. Suspect. Lansing and Kent were there to testify about their investigation. The defendant, a lanky man in his 20s, kept shifting in his seat, eyes darting from the officers to Regina, as if unsure whether to trust the system at all. When Lansing took the stand, Regina could practically feel the tension humming through the courtroom. He cleared his throat and avoided her gaze. The arrogance she'd seen the night before had drained away, replaced by a jittery caution. She wondered if he was recalling every mocking word he'd hurled at her, every dismissive gesture. "Officer Lansing," said the prosecutor, "a no-nonsense woman named Dana Hughes. Could you detail the events leading up to the arrest of Mr. Anthony Barlow?" Lansing locked his hands together and stared at the floor before replying, "We received a report of a break-in at approximately 10:02 p.m. Dispatch gave a suspect description that matched the defendant. We apprehended him a few blocks from the scene." Hughes nodded. "And when you apprehended him, how did you confirm he was the suspect in question?" Lansing swallowed. "He fit the description given by a witness and ran when we approached." Regina leaned forward slightly. "Officer Lansing, did you find any stolen property on Mr. Barlow when you detained him?" He finally looked up at her, and their eyes locked. Regina saw the fear behind his carefully controlled expression, She was the same woman he'd berated and shoved not even 12 hours ago. Slowly, he shook his head. "No, Your Honor, we did not." "Then on what basis did you determine probable cause?" she asked, a thread of steel in her tone. The gallery was utterly silent, the question hanging like a weight. Lansing visibly tensed. "He ran from us. That raised suspicion." A small part of Regina recognized the defendant's perspective. A young black man sees cops in a tense neighborhood. He panics. It wasn't a reach to think maybe fear alone caused him to flee. She also recognized something else. Lansing was used to not being challenged. With a measured nod, Regina said, "Very well. Counselor, proceed." The hearing continued for another hour. Regina allowed the attorneys to spar over details, to ask Lansing and Kent about their procedures. She forced herself to remain impartial, focusing on the burglary charge rather than her personal vendetta. By the time the hearing adjourned, it was evident the prosecution's case was weak. Regina scheduled a follow-up for the next week, but hinted strongly that she expected more evidence or the charges might be dismissed. When she stepped away from the bench, Lansing and Kent hovered by the exit. She could sense them watching her. She felt the ripple in the air as she walked by, an unspoken mix of confusion, fear, and anger. Kent murmured, "Judge Alexander, could we have a word?" She paused, turning to face them. "Certainly," she replied evenly. He glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. Lansing looked like he'd swallowed a hornet's nest. His face was pale, and there was a light tremor in his hands. Kent cleared his throat. "About last night." Regina held up a hand. "Officers, do you really want to discuss this here, in a public hallway?" They exchanged a fraught look. Lansing spat out, "We didn't know who you were." Regina's gaze went cold. "I gathered as much." He bristled. "Look, we were just doing our job. We saw someone who—" "You saw a black woman driving a decent car at night and assumed you had the right to harass me," Regina cut in, her voice low and firm. "That's not your job. That's a violation." Kent stepped closer, his tone pitched low, clearly desperate. "If you file a complaint, it'll ruin our careers. We thought—" "You thought I was powerless," Regina said bluntly. "And now you realize I'm not." Lansing's jaw flexed. "We can explain." She inhaled slowly, battling the anger clawing at her insides. "Save it. I haven't decided how I'm going to handle this. But know this. If you try to influence any case in my courtroom or attempt any form of retaliation, you will regret it." Their faces hardened. Regina could see Lansing's old arrogance flicker back to life, but fear still lurked in his eyes. They were cornered men, uncertain which move to make next. "You can't threaten us," Lansing snapped. Regina stepped forward, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "And you can't threaten me. If we're done here, I have other cases to review." She walked away, heart pounding. The entire exchange left a bitter taste in her mouth. She'd always believed in the integrity of the courts, but now she felt the precariousness of her position. Yes, she was a judge, but these two officers might do anything to maintain their power. That night, Regina returned to her office long after everyone else had gone home. Case files littered her desk, but she couldn't focus. Part of her wanted to bury Lansing and Kent in formal complaints and public scandal. Another part feared they'd twist it around, claim she was biased, or worse, orchestrate something behind the scenes. Staring at her reflection in the darkened window, she whispered to herself, "What's the best path for justice?" There was no easy answer. A tense hush settled over the courthouse the next morning. Rumors circulated about a confrontation between the new judge and two officers in the hallway. No one knew the full story, but whispers about bias and possible misconduct floated through the corridors. Regina felt the eyes on her wherever she went, but she refused to cower. She had a job to do, and that job included hearing motions on a high-profile corruption case that had landed in her lap just days earlier. Allegations were swirling around the city's police department. Bribes for evidence, missing narcotics from the lockup, a possible ring of officers involved in covering up wrongful arrests. It was the sort of case that threatened to topple careers and expose deep-seated rot within the system. Inside Courtroom B, the atmosphere crackled with tension. The defendant was a mid-level officer named Barnes, accused of selling confiscated drugs and splitting the profits with other cops. Barnes sat beside his defense attorney, projecting a studied calm. Meanwhile, the prosecution had an entire team of investigators, paralegals, and city officials scrutinizing every piece of evidence they could find. Regina scanned the faces in the courtroom. She recognized many of them from news reports and departmental rosters. The district attorney's office was on edge, determined to secure a conviction that would send a message. The police brass, seated at the back, looked grim, as if they sensed a reckoning looming. Then she noticed Lansing and Kent slipping in through the side door. They weren't on duty today, yet here they were, eyes flicking back and forth like they were searching for vulnerabilities. Or maybe they were ensuring the corruption case didn't brush too close to them. Regina's stomach twisted. She couldn't pretend the sight of them didn't shake her, but she was determined not to show it. If they thought they could rattle her on the bench, they were mistaken. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Regina entered, robes flowing, chin lifted. The pounding of her heart steadied as she took her seat. She nodded for everyone to sit, then scanned the docket. "This court will now hear the motion to dismiss filed on behalf of Officer Barnes," she began, her tone projecting authority she'd spent years perfecting. Barnes's defense attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit, rose. "Your Honor, we maintain that the evidence collected was done so under a flawed warrant, which invalidates the subsequent search and seizure." As he launched into his argument, Regina kept her focus on the legal points. She reminded herself of the fundamentals: fairness, due process, the rule of law. She could not let personal grudges color her decisions. But every so often, she'd catch a glimpse of Lansing in the gallery. He wore a look of casual confidence, arms crossed, like he was daring her to slip. An hour later, after hearing arguments from both sides, Regina leaned forward. Having reviewed the warrant and the sworn affidavits, the court finds there is sufficient basis for probable cause, and the motion to dismiss is denied. Officer Barnes will proceed to trial. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Barnes's face darkened, and his attorney glowered. The prosecution team exchanged pleased nods. Regina tapped the gavel, calm despite the tension. "We will reconvene on Tuesday for the next hearing." She rose, and the bailiff closed the session. Lansing and Kent lingered near the exit, presumably waiting for her. Regina braced herself for yet another confrontation, but just as she left the bench, she saw them slip away. That afternoon, she found a note slipped under her office door. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was cramped. The words hurried. "They know what happened last night. Be careful who you trust." Regina felt the hair on her neck rise. Who had written it? Another judge? A clerk who overheard something? Or maybe even a guilt-ridden officer who hated how Lansing and Kent behaved. She carefully folded the note and tucked it into her briefcase. The deeper she got into the corruption case, the more she discovered just how interconnected the police force was. It wasn't just a few bad apples. There were entire pockets of unethical behavior. Most officers were decent people risking their lives every day, but the ones who weren't decent seemed emboldened by years of looking the other way. As evening fell, Regina met with her longtime mentor, retired Judge Carolyn Easton, over coffee. In a quiet cafe downtown, she confided in Easton about Lansing and Kent. "They've already threatened me in their own way," Regina said, stirring her latte, "and now I get this anonymous warning note. I can't even prove who left it." Easton pressed her lips together thoughtfully. "Fear tactics. They're trying to shake your confidence, make you doubt your own neutrality." Regina looked down at the swirl of foam in her cup. "I'm not sure I can remain neutral. They harassed me. They physically assaulted me. It's personal now." Easton's gaze was gentle but firm. "Regina, you stand for the law. Yes, you're human. You're angry, and justifiably so. But letting personal vengeance seep into your rulings could undermine you. If they can spin this as a vendetta, it discredits your entire court." Regina swallowed hard. She knew Easton was right. "What do I do?" The older woman leaned back, a subtle sadness in her eyes. "You follow procedure. If they broke laws, you file a complaint. If they show up again, document everything. Meanwhile, you handle the corruption case by the book. Eventually, if Lansing and Kent are part of something bigger, the truth may surface. But don't let them provoke you into a misstep." Regina nodded, feeling the weight of those words. Lansing and Kent were circling like vultures, testing the boundaries of her patience, her professionalism, her sense of justice. She resolved, at that moment, to follow Easton's advice. She would not stoop to their level. She would stand firm, both as a judge and as a woman who refused to be intimidated. Days melted into a swirl of hearings, motions, and late-night strategy sessions. Regina balanced her regular docket with the intensifying corruption case, while Lansing and Kent seemed to loom like shadows in the background. They never confronted her directly in the courthouse again, but she often spotted them at the edges of the corridors, conferring with colleagues, eyeballing her from a distance. The anonymous note remained tucked in her briefcase. She kept it, as a reminder that she wasn't imagining the tension. Someone else had seen the undercurrents and wanted to warn her. Then, one morning, her clerk rushed in with urgency etched across her features. "Your Honor, there's a problem in the holding area." Regina followed her clerk downstairs to a cramped corridor where defendants typically waited for their hearings. Raised voices echoed off cinder-block walls. She found Lansing and Kent physically escorting a handcuffed man who was cursing loudly, demanding to speak to a lawyer. The man's face was bruised, his lips split. "What is going on here?" Regina demanded. Lansing started to speak, but Kent cut in. "We caught him trying to run off, resisting arrest." The handcuffed man spat blood on the floor. "They jumped me in the hall. I wasn't running anywhere." A cold anger stirred in Regina's gut. She turned to the guard stationed nearby. "Did you see what happened?" The guard looked uneasy, shifting from foot to foot. Officers Lansing and Kent insisted he was causing trouble. It happened fast. I didn't see the start." Regina locked eyes with Lansing. "You have no authority to escort any defendant in this building without being requested by the bailiff or the assigned officer. Why are you even in the holding area?" Kent lifted his chin. "We're still on the force, Judge. We have every right to secure a potential threat." Her voice turned razor-sharp. "And who labeled him a threat? You two?" Lansing's gaze flicked away. "We were just trying to maintain safety." Regina gestured for the bailiff. "Take the defendant to the infirmary. Get him medical attention immediately." She then faced Lansing and Kent, heart pounding in her ears. "And you two, come to my chambers. Now." A tangible sense of shock rippled through the hallway. Officers rarely got summoned like reprimanded schoolchildren by a judge. But Regina had had enough. Inside her chambers, she closed the door behind them. "Explain yourselves," she demanded, her voice resonating in the small space. Kent started. "Shut the door, Lansing," she snapped, cutting him off. Lansing obeyed, the tension in the room palpable. Regina fixed both of them with a glare. "Ever since our encounter, you've been trying to flex your power. You show up at my hearings, linger in the hallways, and now you're assaulting a man in the holding area? You realize the liability you're exposing yourselves to, and this courthouse, too?" Lansing's jaw tightened. "He was a danger." "Spare me," Regina shot back. "I won't stand for your intimidation tactics any longer. I should file a complaint with Internal Affairs and have you both suspended." Kent's face burned red. "On what grounds? We're doing our duty, and you're making it personal." Regina's laugh was cold. "You want to talk about personal? You assaulted me. You think I've forgotten the bruise on my arm, the way you mocked me? And now you're picking fights with defendants in my courthouse? This is beyond personal. It's systemic abuse of power." The words hung in the air, thick as smoke. For a moment, she wondered if they might lash out physically right there. Lansing's hands twitched, and Kent looked furious, but neither made a move. "You wouldn't dare," Lansing finally said, voice low with threat. "You go to IA. We'll bury you in countersuits for misconduct. We'll spin this into a race thing, a vendetta. Every case you touch will be under scrutiny. You think the press won't eat that up?" Regina's nostrils flared. Fear lanced through her. Not because Lansing was right about the merits of such accusations, but because she knew how narratives could be twisted. People loved a scandal. And the media often grabbed sensational headlines without waiting for context. Kent stepped closer, voice quieter. "This can all go away, Judge. We'll leave your courtroom alone. You leave us alone. We don't want any trouble." A swirl of conflicting emotions clouded Regina's mind. She hated to admit it, but a full-blown public feud could indeed compromise her role in the corruption trial. It might give Barnes's defense team ammunition to claim the entire department was under siege by a biased judge. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then reopened them. "Get out of my chambers," she ordered, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "If I see one more incident, one more step over the line, I will file every complaint possible, and I'll make sure we end up in front of a grand jury if needed. Now, go." The two officers glared but finally left, slamming the door. Regina collapsed into her chair, pressing shaking hands against her forehead. She wasn't sure how much longer she could hold the line this way. Every day felt like a battle for her integrity, and she hadn't yet begun the official trial for the corruption case. That evening, she called Justice Garrett, confiding everything. He listened solemnly, then spoke in a voice filled with concern. "Tread carefully, Regina. These men are desperate. Desperate people can do dangerous things." She shuddered at the truth of that statement. Lansing and Kent weren't just bullies now, they were cornered predators. She could feel it, like a storm gathering on the horizon. The week of the corruption trial arrived with a media storm swirling around the courthouse. Reporters lined the steps, jostling for position. Protesters waved signs demanding police accountability. Others carried placards accusing the justice system of a witch hunt against law enforcement. The city buzzed with tension, uncertain which side to believe. Regina parked in a secured lot, her heart pounding as she made her way inside. She was to preside over the biggest case of her career, involving Officer Barnes, alleged to be the nexus of a network of crooked cops. If the evidence held, it would implicate half a dozen more officers, maybe more. The instant she entered courtroom C, cameras flashed from the press section. This was a high-stakes trial, and the media had been granted limited access. Barnes sat at the defense table, outwardly calm. The prosecution team included a special investigator from the Attorney General's office, reflecting just how serious these allegations were. As the trial commenced, witness after witness described shady deals, tampered evidence logs, falsified paperwork. Regina steered the proceedings with an even hand, making sure objections were fair, ensuring each side had equal opportunity to question or refute testimonies. Yet beneath her robe, her nerves twisted. She kept thinking, if Lansing and Kent's names popped up, would they retaliate? If the trial exposed them, how far would they go to protect themselves? On the third day of testimony, a sudden turn occurred. One of the prosecution's key witnesses nervously revealed a ledger that tracked bribe payments. While scrolling through entries on the overhead projector, a hush fell as a certain notation appeared. Payout L&K. The witness explained. That was shorthand for 2 officers, but wouldn't say more without a guarantee of protection. Regina's pulse hammered in her temples. L&K, Lansing and Kent. The entire courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Barnes's face twitched almost imperceptibly. The prosecution hammered the point. Are you telling us that L&K refers to Sean Lansing and Gabriel Kent? The witness squirmed, eyes flicking to the gallery. Then he gave the slightest nod. That's correct. An explosion of murmurs swept the courtroom. The judge's gavel, Regina's gavel, came down hard. Order. I will have order. She forced her voice to ring out, commanding attention. When the dust settled, it was clear this trial was no longer just about Barnes. Lansing and Kent had been implicated in bribery and drug skimming. If proven, they could be indicted. Regina glanced toward the back, half expecting them to be there, lurking. But she didn't see them. A jolt of worry spiked through her. Day's end, she recessed court with instructions for the jury not to read any media coverage. The moment she stepped off the bench, her clerk approached with wide eyes. Your Honor, Lansing and Kent want to see you in your chambers. Her blood ran cold. She couldn't refuse them outright. They were still officers, albeit suspicious ones, but she had every right to ask for a witness. So she calmly said, Tell them to wait 5 minutes. Then send in Officer Rodriguez from court security to join us. Yes, ma'am, her clerk said, hurrying off. Regina prepared herself, smoothing her robe, reminding herself of her duty. When she entered her chambers, Lansing and Kent stood inside. Officer Rodriguez, stationed by the door, wore a neutral expression. Judge, Lansing said, voice tight. We need to talk. She moved behind her desk, wanting that barrier. What's so urgent? Kent glared at Rodriguez. In private. No, Regina answered firmly. Anything you have to say can be said in front of Officer Rodriguez. Now, speak. Lansing's fury boiled just under the surface. This witness of yours is lying, tying us to Barnes. He's not my witness, Regina corrected, her tone clipped. And if you're involved, that's going to come out in court, not here in my chambers. Kent's nostrils flared. You could shut it down. You could rule that testimony as inadmissible. Regina's eyebrows shot up. And on what legal grounds? Do you even hear yourselves? You're asking a judge to bury evidence in a corruption case. Kent's gaze flicked to Lansing. The tension was suffocating. If our names go on that official record, we're finished. We'll lose everything. Regina's lips parted in disbelief. Maybe you should have thought about that before taking bribes. If that's what you did. Lansing slammed his hand on her desk, making Rodriguez tense instantly. Regina refused to flinch. I'm not going down for something we all know is routine, Lansing hissed. Every cop in this city knows the system has cracks. We just took advantage. Why should we be singled out? Regina's voice dropped, each syllable deliberate. Because it's illegal. And you hurt people. You hurt me, personally. You hurt others who never had a voice. Kent looked desperate now. We can't go to jail. Look, we can make this right. We can talk to Barnes, see if there's a deal. Just make sure that Ledger never gets admitted. A wave of revulsion swept through Regina. It was all so brazen. You're bargaining with the wrong person, she said. I'm a judge, not a co-conspirator. Lansing and Kent exchanged a dark look. Then Lansing muttered, You'll regret this. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. Is that a threat? No, Lansing said too quickly. Just a fact. Regina's heart pounded as she pointed to the door. Get out. If you ever show your faces here again with these demands, I'll report you for criminal contempt. They left, tension radiating off them like heat from a furnace. Regina sank into her chair, adrenaline coursing through her. She glanced at Rodriguez, who gave a concerned nod. I'll be right outside if you need me, Judge. When she was alone, she let out a trembling breath. Lansing and Kent were cornered, and that made them more volatile than ever. But she wouldn't, compromise justice to appease them. A week later, the final day of Barnes's trial arrived. The prosecution presented the ledger in full. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before finding Barnes guilty on multiple counts of corruption and narcotics distribution. Pandora's box had cracked open. Investigations into Lansing and Kent were imminent. Regina delivered the verdict, her voice steady, though her nerves felt frayed. The system had begun to right a wrong, and if Lansing and Kent ended up indicted, so be it. After the verdict was read and the gavel fell, Regina allowed herself a small, private smile. They had mocked her. They had threatened her. But in this courtroom, she stood as justice incarnate. And justice did not flinch. I hope you enjoyed this new story. If you did, please share it with someone who loves gripping tales of right versus wrong. And don't forget to subscribe to Stay Tuned for more. In the meantime, I've handpicked 2 other stories I know you'll love. Check them out right here and keep that thirst for truth alive.